Good evening. I'm going to stay over here so I'm not standing in front of anyone. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor here at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection. And we are so glad you came tonight. Thank you for being here. I wasn't envisioning this many people on Sunday night at 6:30. This is so cool. And so I want to thank you for being here tonight. Carol Cartmell, who is our executive director or senior director overseeing all of our missions and community outreach, she's going to be our moderator for this evening, and she's going to introduce our panel in just a moment. But I want to remind you that we spent the last year and a half at Church of the Resurrection trying to discern where is God leading us by the year 2030. Now, very few organizations do an 11-year strategic plan, and it usually doesn't make sense. You've got so much change that happens over that period of time. But as we were thinking about this, we were feeling that there are some things that you can't do in a 2 or 3 year strategic plan. There are some things that are so important and so big that you need to be looking at, a decade to be working on them. And we said, what are those things, maybe 4 big ideas of things that God would be calling us to do so that by the year 2030, that will be our 40th anniversary as a church, we will have looked back and said, look what God did through us, and we had an opportunity to do. We've been talking the last few weeks about our walk with God and what that looks like, and last week we talked about serving God by serving other people. And one of the things that's really clear when we read in the Scripture, both the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament and the New Testament, is God's concern for the poor, the marginalized, the people who are left out, the people who don't have justice, that is, the opportunities that other people have. And this weekend we were talking about giving and generosity and the lines. I had to leave the lines. I had to cut in line at the bookmobile in order to buy my books so that I could come over here, so that we can provide books through the bookmobile. And in so many ways you're trying to do this, but this big picture idea that started by talking with folks in the greater Kansas City areas, they were saying, we're working currently with 8 elementary schools in lower income communities. And we hope to add 2 more to that in the next 11 years or next 10 years. But what we were hearing again and again is we really need to start before we get to kindergarten. And if we could start before we get to kindergarten, there's an opportunity these kids might have to through education and love and care of their teachers and others, be able to move out of poverty. And when we shared that with you, you said that makes our heart beat fast. This was the top goal of all of the goals we talked about. We talked about dozens of goals. And this was the top vote getter, was people saying, yes, we feel God is calling us to do that. The folks who are up here in front of us are going to help us understand just how hard that is. They're going to help us think about, what does this actually look like? And what are the possibilities and what are the obstacles and how do we move forward from here? And so tonight, we've come. I'm going to be sitting with you. Lavon's going to be back here in the back of the room somewhere as well, and we're going to be sitting, joining you, listening. And this is sort of the first launch step of this 11-year journey. So I'd like to open us with prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Carol Cartmell. Would you bow with me in prayer? Open our ears to hear, O God, and our hearts to receive what you have from these leaders who are sitting before us. We thank you for their work as pioneers, as people on the front lines, as people who care about our community and care about children. We pray that you would help them not grow weary in well-doing. We pray that you would strengthen them and encourage them and give them wisdom, and we pray that you would use them to speak to us today. We offer ourselves to you and this church to you. Help us, O Lord, so that the least of these might have the opportunity to become all that you created them to be. Guide us, O Lord, we pray. We thank you for this night. In Jesus' name, amen. Carol?
Thank you, Adam. And thank you all for being here tonight. And before we get started and before I introduce our distinguished panel, I understand that we have some of our partner schools, our educators in the room tonight. And so if you are here from either one of our partner schools, from one of the districts, or from one of the community organizations where we are in partnership, would you just stand so we could recognize you? Thank you. And then I want to take one more point to recognize some folks in this room. And we are having this conversation today because we have established a great partner relationship with these 8 elementary schools. And that's only because of so many of you out in the audience tonight who volunteer there. So if you are one of our partner school volunteers, whether you're a liaison, a tutor, someone who serves in the backpacks ministry, beds, whatever it might be, would you please stand up real quickly so we could thank you? All right, and now to what we've come here for tonight. As Adam mentioned, we are just embarking on this journey. And before we can embark on it, we have to grow in our understanding and learn. And I can't think of a better panel of folks tonight to share with us from their years and years of experience. So I'm going to introduce them and then allow them to have some opening remarks and share a little bit about what they might have us learn initially. And I'm going to start with Giovanna Ross. And Giovanna is the Director of Early Learning for the Mid-America Regional Council. And for over the past 20 years, she's served in a variety of roles within the field of early childhood education. She's been a classroom teacher, an early interventionist, a home visitor, a teacher educator, a researcher, and an advocate. And in her current role, Dr. Ross oversees the Metropolitan Council on Early Learning, as well as the Mid-America Head Start, and she currently holds an appointment on the first ever Jackson County Community Children's Services Fund Board of Directors. Thank you so much for being here. Seated next to Giovanna is Dean Olson, and he's the president and CEO of the Family Conservancy. It's a nonprofit agency that is dedicated to helping Kansas City children and families achieve success in school and life. And you've been with the Family Conservancy for 26 years. That's a long time. You've been a champion for children and for families in Kansas City for many, many years, so thank you for that. You currently serve on the boards of Child Care Aware of Kansas and Kids Win, Missouri, and you're also a member of the board of directors of the Children's Campus of Kansas City. So thank you so much for being here. And I think you'll recognize Mary Esselman, the CEO of Operation Breakthrough. She's been in videos here recently. Operation Breakthrough serves more than 700 children from Kansas City's urban core each weekday, providing early learning, before and after school enrichment, and many supportive and therapeutic services as well. In the past year, you've also overseen a pretty major capital expansion, and if you've not been down to their facilities lately, it's incredible what they've done down there, including adding a bridge across Troost Avenue from the old building to the new building. They've also created a Maker City, which the Maker Cities have been in the news quite a bit, but it's an opportunity for children and youth to develop 21st century skills. And you're a 25-year veteran of urban education, and you just bring a wealth of experience as well, so thank you so much for being here. And then Deirdre Anderson is next, and she's the Chief Executive Officer of United Intercity Services in the St. Mark Center. And you serve, the centers serve as a neighborhood anchor, providing a variety of social services and education programs, community arts programs, and neighborhood outreach. St. Mark Center is home to the signature early learning programs at UICS, and it has been recognized as one of the best providers in the city. Deirdre's passion for early learning as a springboard to academic success has fueled an innovative and effective approach at the center, ensuring that all children are afforded equitable access to high-quality learning, exposure to arts, and social support. So thank you so much for being here. And then finally, Amy Loveland. She is a principal at 2 of the early childhood centers, education centers in Kansas City, Kansas public schools. And the 2 that she actually oversees are feeders into our 2 partner schools, Welburn and Quindaro. And you have taught early education for 13 years. Prior to finding your perfect fit, I hear, in school administration in the field of early childhood. The Kansas City, Kansas public schools, they offer 5 early education programs, I'm told, for almost 2,000 children, ages 3 to 5. And about 95% of the families live under the federal poverty line, and all of the families served meet at least one at-risk criteria. This is your 5th year as an administrator for Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools and in the early childhood program, and thank you so much for being here. Can we thank them, please? So for the past 13 years, our focus has been engaging with our partner schools. And during the process of Vision 2030, one of the things that became really present as a need was the fact that these kids were showing up at kindergarten, perhaps they weren't kindergarten ready. And we're just beginning as a congregation to figure out what role we might play in closing that gap and helping them to become kindergarten ready. We'd like to hear briefly from each of our panelists first, from their perspectives, as you think about this audience, and again, we're here to learn tonight, and the demographics of the families that you encounter and that you serve, and the children that would benefit most. What would you want us to know? And so I'm going to turn to Giovanna first, and she has some information to share with us.
Well, thank you all again for having us, and I'm going to share some data, because if any of you know about the Mid-America Regional Council, is that we have a lot of data, a lot of information that we share, because what we really look at is how do we build the context of the work that is going to happen within communities, whether it's air quality, water quality, transportation, homeland security, et cetera, and early childhood. How do we really set the context so that we know that what we're doing is in the areas that is needed and are addressing the needs that are present? And so I just wanted to share with you some of the information that we gathered in our latest status of children and families in the greater Kansas City area. The MARC region touches 4 counties on the Kansas side of the state line and 5 counties on the Missouri side of the state line, which make up the metro. And so we always try to look regionally before we dive into a specific community within the area. And so lately we've been really interested in what's going on with children under 5. And what you can see from the graph is that the blue line is the United States, the orange line is the Kansas City metro area, and both on the trend lines, actually the number of children under 5 is decreasing, which is interesting, right? You might ask yourself, well, why is that happening? Why are we seeing that decrease with just a little bit of an uptick? But if you start to look at the generational change and the timing of individuals having children, that is having an impact on the population. However, at the same time that we're seeing that decrease in the children under 5, we're seeing an increase in the diversity of that population. And in fact, currently, by age cohort, the children under 5 in our region are the most diverse. And so 37% of our children in the region are of minority backgrounds. When you look at the 35 to 54, they're at 25%, and at 65 plus, they're less than 15%. So while we're getting a little bit of a smaller number of children under 5, their diversity is increasing, which means that we need to be thinking differently about the work that we're doing in classrooms. So you can see this is one of our nice little heat maps, and so the darker the color, the more children under 5 there are. And so you can start to see on the map where the concentration of children and the percent of the population under 5 lie. And all of this is on our website, because I know it's harder to see, but marc.org, and Carol has the connection as well. The other question we wanted to ask, well, if we know that there's a decrease in the number of children under 5, and it's just a little of a slow downturn, how does that compare with our 5 to 9-year-olds within communities? Because as you're thinking about planning and where you're going to deploy services, it's helpful to know where are the most children. And so this map here really looks at where are we going to see more children under 5 than their 5 to 9 cohort. And this is by school district. And so north of the river on the Missouri side, you're seeing that uptick. And then you can see that sort of in that Shawnee Mission and Blue Valley area on the Kansas side as well. And so it's, again, just that glimpse into where are these children and what should we expect as they're coming up. And so one of the things that we look at as well is, well, where are the children and families in poverty? And just as a reminder, it's always helpful to think about, well, what is the poverty threshold? And so we use the federal poverty determination. And so for a family of 4, that's roughly $25,000 a year, almost $26,000 a year. So just, keeping that into perspective. And so this is our total population in poverty. And I want to point out that number 7. You can sort of see that number 7 where it's dark. If you look at that, that's I-70 and then I-49 coming down on that Missouri side. So going from Wyandotte County in KCK over and then down through KC-Mo and into South Kansas City area. This is a line that comes up a lot when we start to talk about individuals that may be at risk or have needs that will benefit from having some assistance as well. And so when we look at the total population, so this is all age cohorts, it lights up this way. When we look at the children under 5, it actually lights up in a different way. So while your total population in some areas of our community may not see as much poverty, you see more of that beige area, you can see that some of those darker lines, particularly when we go over to Leavenworth and to western Johnson County, it lights up. And so just a quick side-by-side, if you think about Leavenworth County in particular, you may see the first map of the total population and think, oh, there's not much poverty in Leavenworth. But when we overlay it and put it next to the children under 5 living in poverty, we see it actually does light up, and we have more children under 5 living in poverty. And so that means the needs are different for some of those families with young children in that county. And so we also want to look at not just the demographics overall, but what's going on when it comes to child care and pre-K. One of the things that we find that when families are in poverty or maybe the working poor, they tend to rely on informal networks of care. So maybe I'll call my friend down the street, or I have the grandmas up the road, or maybe my sister or my sister's friend. We call that family, friend, and neighbor care. And so we did an overlay this year where we looked at the characteristics of individuals who tend to take advantage of family, friend, and neighbor care. And again, if you remember that line, that 7 that we saw earlier, we see it light up again. So what does that tell us as early educators is that we need to deploy different resources in those informal care networks than we would need to in those more formal networks. The other question we always get is, well, where are all the child care facilities within our region? And so we mapped out where are those facilities, and you can see there's some places where there's a lot of activity. Johnson County is really interesting in that you see that concentration of facilities, and it varies by capacity. But when you look at then where are those deserts, and deserts are defined as those areas where there's more than 50 children that would need care. There's not enough seats for them. And so you have those beige areas that are considered deserts. And so some of those outlying areas are considered child care deserts where there's not enough seats to meet the demand. And then the other question that came up is this whole idea about readiness for kindergarten. And you know, here is a headline. Readiness actually starts before a child is born by getting the parents ready, actually, or individuals who would have children ready. And readiness actually starts from the child starts from the moment that they are born, moving forward. And so, but there's this real interest in, as they're transitioning from these 4-year-old programs into kindergarten of, well, how are they ready? And beyond academics, beyond can they point to letters, can they name letters, can they rhyme? The building blocks really are around those social emotional skills of, can they be in a group together? Can they regulate? Do they have working memory where they can remember those 2 directives that the teachers are giving them when they walk in the room? Are they able to recall that idea of what's going on? And so recently, and actually this is really fresh, and you all are the first ones to see this, we commissioned a report around readiness where we're starting to gather some baseline data. We work specifically in eastern Jackson County for this work. But what we're finding when we take that holistic view, when we take the motor skills, social, emotional, self-regulation, and academics, 1 in 3 children were not ready for kindergarten. So, you know, what does that mean? Well, we looked at a variety of pieces, and what it really means is they don't have those 3 of those components: the social, emotional, the self-regulation, and then also the academics coming together. At the same time, we also looked at parents and the experiences that they've had with children. And we were able to do some predictors of readiness. And I want to point out one that's really an exciting predictor is that the children that went to an early childhood education and had that experience, they were more ready for kindergarten when they entered. That was along with health, the age, so if a child was older, the more ready they were. And then the other piece is resource use. So faith-based, going to the library, going to the zoo, being out in the community, those were all factors that were predictors of overall readiness. And so I'll leave you with this last idea of, well, what is the recipe? What really can we do? And so if we can put together that quality early learning with health services and caregiver and family support, we start to get to a place where children are going to be ready to learn when they enter that kindergarten classroom.
Again, I want to remind you that a lot of this information is available on the MARC website, and we'll be sharing this, and I'm just really grateful for our partnership. They do so much data work, and we're going to need to know this information, and so thank you so much for sharing this. Dean, would you open us up?
Good evening. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Family Conservancy, and then I'll talk about child development. The Family Conservancy is a rather old agency for the Kansas City area. It was established in 1880. And that was on the Missouri side. In the 1980s, it merged with a Kansas organization that had a similar name, Children and Family Services of Kansas, and one of the original board members was Carrie Nation. So it does have a long history. But throughout that history, we focused on what the family needs were, and family needs have changed, and they changed perhaps every 20 or 30 years dramatically. Right now, the Family Conservancy is focused on the outcome of school readiness, but also strengthening families and having healthy families. And we do that mainly through evidence-based programs, including counseling, counseling for everyday family problems, as well as for trauma and depression and anxiety. In Wyandotte County, we have a bilingual counseling center. We also have a counseling center in Jackson County. So I'm giving you kind of this slow background that we have an expertise in outpatient mental health, in early childhood mental health, and also in improving the quality of early education programs so that kids are ready for school. So why is it so important that kids get ready for school? I think most of you have probably heard that if a child arrives at kindergarten 1 or 2 years behind developmentally, that it's very difficult for them to catch up. Many of those children are not reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade, which means they're 4 times more likely to drop out before they complete high school. But brain development starts actually before birth, and it's very, very important to have healthy brain development in the first 4 or 5 years of life. That creates the foundation for that child's entire life. I don't know if you know this or not, but children can mimic adult facial expressions within the first hour of life. They're born to learn. They need to learn. They need to learn quickly. So there are many windows of developmental opportunities in the first few years of life. In the first year, it's vision and hearing, but also language development is at its high point in a child's entire life between the months of 9 months and 12 months of age. So their ability to learn language is at its highest point before they turn age 1. Therefore, adults need to know how to help those children, help every baby that's born. Many adults know what to do. They talk to babies, they laugh, they smile. There's this back and forth. It's called a serve and return. It's what happens when you play peekaboo. It's what happens when the baby smiles at you and you smile back at the baby. The baby is babbling and you talk to the baby as if the baby can understand you. The serve and return is what is developing the social, emotional skills as well as the early language skills. Some parents don't know this, and parents do need to know this. The American Library Association has done extensive outreach to parents who don't earn very much. They're low income or they're in poverty. And they explain the importance of brain development. They explain the importance of talking and reading to children. And some parents were very surprised. And they said, you know, I thought it was ridiculous to talk to a baby because a baby can't speak to me. So although there's some logic there, it doesn't take into account child development. In Kansas City, Kansas, the University of Kansas did a groundbreaking research where they went into the homes of many families, and they recorded a half an hour of what was going on in the home, and they took. They asked graduate students to calculate and to list every word that was spoken in each family. And what they found is families living in poverty spoke about 616 words per hour to their children, to their infants and their toddlers. In a family with college-educated parents, they spoke 2,000 words per hour to their children. By age 4, the vocabularies of the children who heard 2,000 words was about 2.5 times larger than the children growing up in poverty. Can you imagine coming to kindergarten and you know 1/3 of the words that your peers know? It's going to be very difficult to learn how to read. The good news is another institution, Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institution out of North Carolina, replicated the study that was done in Kansas. They did this in Appalachia, and they added a few components. They came out with roughly the same results based on a parent's income and level of education. They spoke many fewer words to their children. They asked some other questions, and they found out that if a parent knew even a little bit about brain development and child development, they spoke more complexly and more frequently to their children, regardless of income or education. So the key, parents want to do a good job. The key is parents need to know how much interaction they need with their infants and with their toddlers. There have been so many advances in what we know about infant brains. The University of Washington in Seattle has a giant machine where they can measure the electromagnetic changes in the brain of an infant or a toddler. And they've found out that if you expose 9-month-old infants to Mandarin Chinese just a few times and then check months later, they can tell that the children who had the social interaction with the native speaker retained the unique sounds of Mandarin Chinese. They also found that infants that were exposed to the same interactions, but it was on a screen, did not retain any of the unique sounds of Mandarin Chinese. Also, they had a third group of infants that just heard an audio recording. They retained no sounds of Mandarin Chinese. The important thing was a social interaction between a live adult and a live child, that back and forth. That's how children learn. That's enough.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. I know we had received some questions from all of you prior to the event, and I know several of you expressed just an interest in thinking about this issue even prior to being a 4-year-old, and the importance of starting with that brain development even from infancy. So I think that's something we're going to have to definitely look at as we move forward. Mary, would you like to go next and share a little bit about what your learnings have been?
Great. And Dean and Giovanna talked a lot about why early learning is so important in the development of children, and I thought I'd spend a little time in talking just about what does that look like in terms of the different components of a program and what that looks like in supporting children in school readiness and just overall development. So Operation Breakthrough started about 48 years ago, and it was started by 2 nuns that were teaching on the east side. And originally it was all about daycare. You know, some parents came to them and they said, you know, we have no one to watch our children while we're at work. And the sisters thought, you know, we've got all this space, we can do this. And, you know, they started with 4, and 4 turned into 40, and then it turned into 400, and now, you know, soon to reach over 700. And what was important about that is obviously as educators, education became important at the beginning. And I know this is a little bit hard to see, but what they realized really quickly was what happened inside the classroom and outside of Operation Breakthrough was equally important. And so what they started to do, and we still do today, is we integrate education with health and family support services. And that combination of those 3 things is what truly has allowed us to send the vast majority of children to school ready. And that's compared to, I know, Joanna, you talked about 1 in 3 in Kansas City, and nationally, it's a staggering statistic. Less than 50% of children in poverty will enter school ready. And so I want to just talk a little bit about how do all of those things intertwine when we look at the development of young children. And so for us, obviously, we start at 6 weeks and we go all the way up to age 5. A lot of our families are at risk, and so by at risk, I mean average income is less than $1,000 per month. And that's always an interesting statistic because 70% of our parents are actually working. The challenge is most are underemployed, and the types of work, if you don't have transportation in Kansas City, tend to be shift work and jobs without benefits, because transportation across our city can only reach about 19% of jobs within 90 minutes. And so that's kind of where we see some of those demographics. 1 in 5 is homeless. And there's a study that's done, and we do it every 2 years, called the ACEs study that looks at adverse childhood experiences. And it's an important study because it looks at things like domestic violence, incarcerated parents, removal from the home. There's a whole myriad of circumstances that children experience. And if nothing intervenes, research has shown is oftentimes that ACE score of the parent will become the ACE score of the child. So much of what you see in terms of health and support services are meant to give early interventions to children so that we change that trajectory and they don't have that same number of ACEs. Well, we were able to see, you know, what does need look like in Kansas City recently when we expanded. Currently, we have about 36% of our parents have 4 or more ACEs compared to nationally around 13 or 14%. But what we saw when we were able to open a whole new neighborhood of early learning children was much more at-risk children, because normally you're taking one child here or there because there aren't a lot of vacancies. But when we were able to fill multiple classrooms, we saw our income drop to only $600 to $700 a month. We saw instead of 1 in 5 children homeless, we saw 1 in 3 children were homeless, most of which were in sheltered care. And we also saw our ACEs increase to 45%. So I think your timing in terms of really looking at the importance of early learning is huge, because there's a large population in Kansas City that just doesn't have access. So when you look at these 3 circles that intertwine, I think the health side, it's not just physical health, but it's also mental health. When you have children that have had a lot of adversities early, the ability to provide therapeutic services is really important. We are organized into a neighborhood concept, and so every time a child comes in, they're placed into one of 6 neighborhoods, and that neighborhood has children from 6 weeks all the way to kindergarten. And in that neighborhood is a licensed social worker who's a family advocate, there's a child and family therapist, and there's also a behaviorist, and then a team of teachers that stay with those children for the entire 5 years that they're in the neighborhood. And that's really important because it allows the team to be very proactive as opposed to reactive to circumstances that have the potential to impact child development. One of the things you'll see on the social services side is a big thing that we do is we really try to increase protective factors for families. And protective factors are things such as concrete supports. You've named food insecurity. There's also housing insecurity. There's also job insecurity. So all of those things help build a solid foundation for children. And the more stable the child, the more likely they are to meet those fundamental milestones. It also looks at what is the parent's understanding of child development? How resilient is the parent? How well does the child develop in terms of social and emotional development? So those are all aspects that on the supportive services side we work with parents. It's a 2-generational model. We don't just work with children, we work with the whole family. And I think that's what results in children who are able to meet across those myriad of factors that determine school readiness.
Thank you, Mary. You have certainly been on the front lines of this at Operation Breakthrough. And another one who is on the front lines as an educator is Deidre Anderson, and St. Mark's Center is doing some really innovative things. And you brought a few slides to also share with us.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. It's also great to have fellow educators in the room. When I walked in, I was like, I know you. So thanks for having us this evening. I'm not going to, we are very, very similar. United Intercity Services St. Mark's Center is to Operation Breakthrough, just a little bit older. We're 51 years old. Our denominational roots are in the Presbyterian and United Church of Christ's Faith. St. Mark Union Church gave our organization life many years ago, but about 15 or 16 years ago, we built a state-of-the-art facility that has a full theater and stage in the middle. So a couple of distinguishing things that are just a little bit different because of the theater and stage. I think Mary and I both do a lot with the arts, but because we have that full stage, we have many different genres of artists that are coming into the facility and providing that information to kids, because we find art as an opportunity to remediate things for children, whether they're withdrawn or aggressive. Art is just something that helps pull a child out and helps them find their inner voice. I didn't particularly care for art as a kid because I thought I couldn't do it right. And what we're teaching children is there's an artist in everybody, and no matter what your art form is, that you should just go create. And so I'm going to kind of go a little bit higher level and then bring it down local. If I knew then what I know now about what happens under the age of 5, I would have never spent 10 years in the K-12 system. God bless you. Well, you're in early childhood, so. But I was the director of at-risk programs for the Hickman Mills School District for 10 years, and my career was spent trying to help kids be persistent through the K-12 system, many of which did not have a quality early childhood experience. And it was extremely challenging. And it was even more challenging working with families. But in early childhood, you have somebody in that family that's coming into the facility 2 times a day. So putting it in perspective also from brain development. This slide shows you how there are 700 neural connections per second that are happening in the brain. By the time a child enters kindergarten, 80 to 90% of their brain is already fully formed. And if you don't leave with anything else, it's reminding us, it's Sunday and I'm not at work, so I can say what I want to say. So we separate church and state during the week, and I won't do that on Sunday. They are all our children. And if we do not collectively take responsibility for all the children of our community, we will continue to have challenges and we will continue to struggle. I am amazed at the number I'm amazed at the number of well-educated families that don't understand how important early childhood development is. And so we do a lot to talk about poverty, and it is absolutely far more challenging for Mary and I because the majority of our children are very low income and they are economically fragile, but there are other families in our community that are not making good choices about what they're doing with their children before they go to kindergarten. And I think every kindergarten teacher is like, oh my gosh, would you just get them ready for me? So let's see if I can get that. There we go. So this is also why it's important. If we stepped all the way back and did that prenatal care investment, what this bell curve is showing you is the greatest return on the investment happens the younger the child is. And then on the back end is job training. So look how low the return on the investment is if we wait and just try to provide job training programs. This also is just showing you what I just was talking about relative to the brain. There at the top of the curve is at around 4 or 5, where the majority of the brain is already formed, and then you just have a little bit of continued brain development after that. So if we talk about it from a workforce development, and this is just the slide showing the gap that Dean was talking about and the number of words that are spoken in the home. I also think when you're thinking about volunteering and giving, and those of you that are working in the schools already can attest to this, Mary and I don't have, you don't have, none of us have families that don't wake up every day and want the best for their children, but they sometimes just don't know how. And so that gap in the words that are spoken in the home comes from significant amounts of stress. We've all had that unexpected bill that's come up, something that happened that just threw our life into a tailspin, and it's stressful. And the words that come out of our mouths with our kids in those moments are not always the best, right? Well, if you're living day in and day out in that impoverished situation in a community where there's gun violence and you're wondering whether or not you're going to live or die, it's hard. And so that's a lot also of why you see that gap in the language that's spoken. You're going to have all these slides hopefully for your future reference as well. But the High Scope Perry study went in depth talking about our future and kindergarten readiness. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide. So these are the areas that it looked at, and they watched children over time, and they came back. So the blue shows those that were a part of the early childhood program, and the gray was the comparison group. So in terms of arrest rates, they were lower, earning $20,000 more at age 40. It was higher. Graduating from high school, look how far that dips out, 77% versus 60%. Basic achievement at 49 to 15%. So there's been a lot that has been said about refuting, you just don't see the gains continue over time. Actually, it does continue to accumulate over time is actually what they say. So you enter kindergarten ready, and even if third grade scores dipped in any way, later in life, kids that have had a quality early childhood program will see continued gains. But it's also really important, where are they transitioning to? Are they going to a great school with a strong principal, or that has a strong core curriculum, or is it a program that is maybe a little bit, less organized? Homework and then also IQ levels. This shows you, nobody's probably seen anything in the news about what's going on with pre-K tax on the other side of the line, but this slide here really just shows you, based on income levels, 34% of our children are living in very low income, 0 to 125% of the federal poverty level. There's only 34% enrolled in a quality pre-K program. So it's about the exact same. So we have 1,400 children currently that are on the Head Start waiting list. My own center has about 200 on the waiting list, and so the ability to actually serve all the children right now, we're tremendously challenged. And I just want to leave you with pictures. Mary had pictures as well. This is, again, about personalizing the conversation and reminding us they're just children. They're all of our children, and if we collectively take responsibility for them, we will see a positive return.
Thank you so much. We also wanted to have at least one representative here from one of our partner school districts, and so Amy has graciously joined us tonight, and you actually started out in the Blue Valley School District and have moved to KCK. But share with us a little bit of your perspective about the importance of this topic from a public educator's point of view.
Well, I have to say that being here tonight and seeing this many people in my home community that are interested and passionate, as I am, about impacting the lives of children in my work community is really uplifting and is going to make it so much easier for me to go back to work tomorrow. So I appreciate all of you being here this evening. So I spent all of my teaching career here in Blue Valley, and I live 10 minutes down the road, doing early childhood special education. And there was a unique opportunity when I was ready to move into school administration for me to take an early childhood position as a early childhood administrator in KCK. So I'm about 5 years ahead of you in the learning curve with regard to what early childhood looks like in that community. And I can tell you, we're making great strides. 5 years ago, the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools became the Head Start delegate and was able to double the number of preschoolers that they serve. And that is specifically the role that I am in terms of administering programs at 2 of those locations. But there's still so much more we want to do. I don't have all of the statistics, though I know that they are very much like what Mary shared from her side of the state line. We're seeing that as we increase the number of kids we serve, we're finding children with greater needs. As we are able to offer different programs, half day and whole day, we see more and more families that are able to participate than were able to before, but have more ACEs and more risk factors and more needs beyond just education. It is really heartening for me to know, because I'm in your community too, that you're doing more than just looking at school readiness, because those are the things that are required to support those families and make a difference in the lives of children, because it is about food insecurity, it's about housing, it's about having a bed to sleep in at night, and then a myriad of other issues that lead to or get in the way of the children being able to learn. I have, in one of the centers that I am the administrator, I have approximately 26 of my students who have a parent who is currently incarcerated. That makes a huge difference in what they are coming into school with in terms of baggage, and then the support that is available to whoever is parenting them at home. And so these are all issues that we have to look at and consider when we talk about readiness. And the thing that has come up down this panel that I want everyone to remember is it's not ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. It is about social skills. It is about their ability to function in a group, their ability to follow directions, their ability to feel safe in their environment. And that is the most important thing we can give them, is that sense of safety and community. And that's when they are able to let their guard down and become the person that they were intended to be. And Deidre's right. It doesn't matter what their last name is. It doesn't matter what their home language is. It doesn't matter what their zip code is. They are all our children, and they are all going to contribute to the society that we will have in the next 10 and 11 years. And so I so appreciate that as you are thinking that far out, you are thinking about our children.
Yes, thank you so much. So a number of you, we're going to move to some questions now. A number of you mentioned barriers. There were some, I actually attended a recent American Public Square Forum. Mary, you were there. A little bit of debate around the sales tax, which we're not going to get into that tonight. We're going to wait and see what happens on Tuesday. But you know, there was a little bit of conflictual back and forth around some of the studies that have been done in terms of, you know, how important pre-K is, and you know, would the children catch up by the time they're in 3rd and 4th grades anyway? And then I heard recently NPR shared a study that the problem was more one of unequal access, that while all kids would benefit from preschool, it's the poor and the disadvantaged kids that often make the most gains. And then you also talked a little bit about the diversity issue and how we are becoming a more diverse community. And part of that has to do with language barriers as well. And so they were saying in the study that children from dual language backgrounds were also among those to make the most significant gains from a quality pre-K education. So I'd like to hear maybe from a couple of you, what are your reactions to the findings by the more recent studies as they relate specifically to children who are impacted by poverty and language barriers, barriers that we often find in the neighborhoods surrounding our partner schools? Giovanna, I'll start with you.
Sure, and I think one of the pieces when we think about children who are economically fragile, I like that term that was used rather than disadvantaged, but those economically fragile children or in households, when you think about economics, that's one piece of this huge part of their life that impacts a lot. Where am I going to sleep tonight? Where is our meal coming from? The stress of the families, and so the interactions aren't as strong. Dean shared about that importance of serve and return. Well, if I'm a stressed parent who maybe I had to miss work because my child was sick and I'm going to have to interact with you, but I can't figure out what we're going to eat and I know you're hungry, I'm not going to want to have that serve and return. My interactions are going to look very different. And so when you think about why maybe those children would benefit more, it's because when they move into that classroom environment at an Operation Breakthrough or at a St. Mark or in the KCK public schools, it's safe. It feels comfortable. You have people there that are there to specifically build those relationships and have that opportunity to have those communications. And they're there to set up these provocations to help you to think about things differently. And so whereas all children benefit from that, not all children get that outside of those school hours. And so really that idea around what are the experiences that they're having in the classroom is that impact. And I think the same goes for those dual language learners as well, in that they may not have that economic fragility that they're coming into the classroom with. They are, you know, on par with their peers in their home language, but what they're learning are new customs and new protocols and new ways to interact with each other. And once I get that down, I'm going to start to come along. But I think the other thing that some of our recent studies that have started to look at, well, why maybe are some children staying up with their peers at 3rd and 4th grade, and why are some of them maybe just even going behind? Part of that has to do with, well, what happens when they go to kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade? I can have the best early childhood experience ever, but if I have 2 years in a row of an ineffective teacher in my early elementary years, it's just as ineffective of not having had that experience ahead. And so we always have to look at not only what are we doing in early childhood, but how are, I always say, pushing that up. How are we pushing up these ideas around critical thinking skills and getting the kids to interact with each other and actually have a voice in a classroom up into those K1, 2, so that they're having those same quality experiences. The other thing is, how do we make sure when the children are walking into that classroom that have had these quality experiences, that teachers are teaching to the knowledge of the children and not to what typical children are walking into the classroom. So if I've had a head start, you shouldn't start me on the same page as you started all the other kids that haven't had the head start. And so how do we differentiate our curriculum so that we're meeting the needs of all the children within the classrooms?
One of the other things I think is interesting about some of the more recent research, when you look at the top 40 largest cities in the country, 20 of them have started offering universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. And there are studies that are now coming out where you have a much broader sample of 4-year-olds. And what they're showing is that by the time they reach those testing years of 3rd and 4th grade, they're actually seeing a sustained difference, which is what some of the earlier research, you know, some studies showed it, some studies didn't, but there wasn't necessarily, they weren't necessarily controlling for things like quality. And so now when you're seeing much broader samples, you're definitely seeing that impact. And I know closer to home for us, we are actually seeing that. So we have started tracking children, because one of the questions we always get is, how do you know you're making a difference? And so what we've done is 2 things. One is we have a release that we can actually get data for all of our children, but we also collect it internally, and we found that for the children we send to school ready, we followed 3 years of children, and 88% of them are still at or above grade level in reading. And so that just shows that we're starting to see a huge effect as we follow children that have had all of those opportunities when they're young. And I think the other thing that you pointed out when we're talking about children that may have not had access, you know, you talked about a place that's safe and nurturing, and that's kind of the order that we look at: safe, nurturing, and educational. And I think one of the most telling things is, like, if you come into our center during kind of 12 to 2 and walk around, you're going to see 375 children sleeping. And a lot of us say at home, you know, I can't even get 2 to sleep at the same time. You know, how do you get 300 and, you know, that many? And it really has to do with the fact that it's a safe place. And when kids are somewhere that's safe and they've got some of those major things taken care of, breakfast, lunch, and those things, they're in a place that opens themselves up to learning. And I think that's one of the huge advantages.
Thank you so much for those responses. One of the things that I really loved about the Mark report, there was a quote in there that I'm going to share. It said, "If we want children in the Kansas City region to thrive in kindergarten and beyond, we must first understand these children, where they live, and potential barriers to their future success." And again, we're here tonight because we want to begin that process of understanding. You're the experts. You're much further down the road than we are. What would you say that we have to be careful not to miss when we're learning about these children? I'm going to start with you, Deirdre.
I believe I'm amongst friends. Oh, Lord. I believe I'm amongst friends, and I don't think it'll be a surprise when I say Sunday is one of the most segregated days of the week. And I think within education and within my experience, we continue to see issues surrounding the performance of Black and brown children and low-income children across the nation. It's not unique to Kansas City. And I think that our mission statement is to build bridges, inspire minds, and impact futures. We do that by experience, exposure, and education. So I'm not saying what I'm saying because what I'm saying is that the exposure to people like that are in this room today, it could be the very thing that could make a difference in a child's life. There are many people that have grown up in poverty that overcame poverty, and most of them will take that back to some caring adult in their life that made a difference, that took the time to talk with them, that exposed them to something new and different. At St. Mark, about 15% of our children are able to pay tuition. We believe in the diversity of income and race, and as we continue to grow, we're in the middle of expanding as well. We are looking at ways that we can increase the number of families that actually are not as economically fragile, because I think if we want to overcome some of the challenges we see in our community around poverty and the outcomes and the challenges that children that are living in poverty experience, we need to continue to expose them to something different than poverty. And the children are eager. Again, they're just children. They get so excited to have visitors and people come. And actually, the families are also really excited to have someone that takes the time to spend some time with them as well. And I think that you will find nothing but, you will think you're going to do something and you will come back feeling like, wow, they did something for me.
Dean, would you like to respond?
Yes, I think understanding culture is very important when you're talking about education. The Children's Campus of Kansas City worked with 17 partners to develop a campaign called Talk, Read, Play with Your Child Every Day. And we did focus groups, and some were in English and some were in Spanish. And after the focus group explaining the concept and asking for their feedback, we noticed a great deal of difference between the Spanish-speaking parents and the English-speaking parents. We had a question, and it said, will you do anything differently now that you've heard this information? And with English-speaking parents, you had some that said, I'll talk more to my child, I'll play more with my child, I'll read more to my child. With the Spanish-speaking parents, every parent put down, I will read more to my child. So there's something different in the culture, and I think no matter what culture you're dealing with, you need to understand what the culture thinks about education and what they gather from what you're telling them about education.
Can I add one quick comment? I think the other thing that is important not to miss is the resilience of the families that we serve. Sister Berta started a tour about 15 years ago that we still do called The City You Never See, and it's a bus tour on the east side, and parents get on the bus and they talk about some of the challenges that they've overcome. And what you see is a culture of resilience. And I think that's really important because when you celebrate that resilience, you're really enabling opportunity for children to really reach their full potential.
Thank you. So in addition to that, so you've kind of, given us some great insight into what we have to be aware of. Are there any particular, we've named that we want to address education. You've shared with us there's a lot more just than academic preparedness. There's behavioral, social stuff. We've also stated that we want to do something about food security, that we want to do something about basic health care. Are we missing anything on the list? Are there challenges that you would say we need to make sure that we're addressing?
I would say there are definite challenges in terms of access to mental health services. Okay. That's a challenge that those of us who live in Johnson County, we're talking about that in our schools for our students here, but it exists all over the metro in terms of a concern. The school district where I'm employed, KCK Public Schools, has been able to put social workers into all the schools, and just this year I was able to have a social worker and a school counselor on my team to serve my two buildings, and the difference it has made in one school year is really impactful, and yet we need more. And when we talk to families about their needs at home, because these kids are only with us for a short amount of time and their parents need that support too, there are great agencies out there, but they can't meet all the demand. And so that's something that I know weighs heavily on educators, but also on parents.
Yeah, go ahead.
Children learn through play under the age of 5, and so having access to meaningful play is critical. The parks in and near and around where I operate and where Mary, and I'm sure in KCK it's not much different. Some of those parks leave quite a bit to be desired. Having access to take your children to Union Station and to plays and to other opportunities, I think that is something that we have found that parents have just really welcomed, having the opportunities to go and have some of those experiences that sometimes they may not have even been aware that some of those activities were available for them as well.
I think transportation is something you're going to have to address. At least on the Missouri side, most early learning does not provide for transportation. It's cost prohibitive and all of the safety metrics, but it's a barrier. It's a huge barrier for families. So, in our case, we provide bus passes to make sure that that doesn't become the reason children don't have access. But I think that will be something that you'll need to consider.
You may have heard the acronym ACEs mentioned several times. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. It comes from a study that was done in Southern California from folks that did have health insurance. and they devised 10 questions, 5 of them having to do with violence or abuse, and 5 of them having to do with family functioning. And the higher, out of those 10, the higher your ACE score showed a strong correlation to a number of health issues as adults, including asthma, cancer, heart disease. So it was a staggering finding when it was discovered that adverse childhood experiences could impact your adult health. We work in a couple of housing authority sites in Kansas City, Kansas, and when our family service worker talked to the residents about ACEs and they looked at those 10, they said, "This is our daily life. We have all 10 of these." I think that's something to remember.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we certainly have a lot to learn, and part of that learning, I think, is having exposure to, and Deidre, you mentioned this, you know, just even now, being able to come down and interact with children at the preschool, or you and I talked a little bit about helping kids successfully transition from the preschool into their various kindergartens. I have to believe that there are places where if somebody out in this audience wanted to get involved right now with your organizations, that you could probably put us to work, and it might be a great opportunity of learning for us as well as a great opportunity to serve. And so I'd love to hear, especially from the 3 of you at the far end, what are some ways that you would say we could engage even now as we're working this 10-year vision? What are some things we could be doing immediately?
Well, one of the conversations that you and I had before we started this evening was keeping in mind that there's a time commitment that comes with this kind of volunteer work, especially if you want to work directly with the children, because these children have a lot of people who have come in and out of their lives. So they're not looking for a one-time drop-in. They're looking for a relationship. And it's really important that we keep that in mind, that really what makes a difference is them having a relationship with an impactful adult in their lifetime. So if you're looking at how you can be impactful and you want to work directly with the kids, be mindful of that. But there are also plenty of other opportunities if you can't commit that ongoing amount of time to get involved with some of the family events, so evening events and those that don't happen as frequently or are more sporadic but are still a need. We have those in all of our early childhood centers in the district, and we tend to be tapping the same teachers and community resources over and over again. So that would definitely be something that it would be nice to have additional support for.
Yeah, we're similar as well. We have several very large events where we could use people if you're interested in more of that one-time thing. There's also opportunities to do support us when we're doing canvassing in the neighborhood, sharing information. If you have really one of the big gaps is volunteers that want to work with families and that would serve as mentors and supports and come alongside us within some of the family programming that we offer, and doing that in a manner that is supportive to the family advocates and our director of family engagement that coordinates those things. And if you're an artist, we always love to have visiting artists that come in and volunteer and share whatever your art form might be. I wanted to say one piece of data that I really, really meant to say. So when Giovanna put up the 2 heat maps with the poverty information, recently the American Heart Association also shared some similar data, and if you overlaid theirs over the top of it, the life expectancy in those areas where the poverty rates were higher is 20 years less. Sorry, I heard an audible gasp.
So school readiness is really hard. You know, when you think about it, you know, one of the assessments that we do has 52 indicators that you look at for overall readiness. And I think one of the reasons nationally those numbers are so low is because when you have a homeless family or a family that's facing all these challenges, I think sometimes inadvertently people kind of feel like they're insurmountable barriers. And so it kind of, well, you know, this is happening or this is happening, that's why. Well, if we all say that every child can be school ready, then volunteers are essential, because as you do each screening and you find out who's on track and off track developmentally, you need to be able to individualize to the children, because if nothing changes, then nothing changes and they'll continue to be off track and not ready. So I think the biggest thing that you can do if you can make the time commitment is to come in and really support classrooms where you can help them individualize based on what children's developmental needs are. And that's going to make the biggest difference in terms of raising the readiness across the city.
Oh, go ahead, Dean.
In Wyandotte County, we have a new program funded by the state of Kansas, where we're working with 10 child care programs. A big need for children in Wyandotte County is to have books to read at home. And so in several of these centers, we've already developed book sharing shelves. And it's not a lending library, it's a taking library. And so from time to time, we have book drives, and we build these shelves, and we put them in child care programs. And then we also have an opportunity to spread the message, talk, read, play with your child every day. And we've had at least one church who worked with us for 5 years in a neighborhood to spread that message. So it's an opportunity.
And if I can just add one more thing, and one thing is advocacy and advocacy opportunities. So as you hear about things, whether at the district level, the city level, the state level, think about how you can use your voice to help to move issues along. If you're hearing of something that is going on that you're really passionate about and you need more information or you need more assistance on how to advocate for that, any of us are willing to be resources. So as you're building what your specific plan is, it's always helpful to keep an idea on keeping an eye on what's going on around you, and how do you really use your voice and your networks to help to push some of those ideas forward as well.
Thank you so much. Well, the bad news is we're running out of time with our panel. The good news is we're going to stay connected to each and every one of these individuals, and they've already promised me that they would continue to be a resource to us as we move forward. But I don't want you to leave without having the opportunity to share with us your thoughts. So I want you to, before we thank the panel, I want you to take a card off of your table. Each of you should have this. And if you would fill this out, if you are interested in helping us with this, this goal of closing the gap, the opportunity gap for these kiddos, I need you to fill one of these out. And there's a lot of different things that we can do here. We can be involved on more of the education side. We could be involved in a group that considers the food insecurity aspect of it. We're going to need people who are going to say healthcare is important, including mental health care. So those are areas that you could get involved. And then there's things that you can do currently. We always have needs at our 8 partner schools. We always can place folks with our hunger ministry. But as we're moving forward with this, and as we're seeking to understand the neighborhoods around these partner schools, we're going to have to do things like asset mapping, and we're going to need technical support and administrative support. And there may be something on that list that's in your mind that isn't on this list. Please fill the card out. If there's something on here that you want to check to sign up for, we'd love to get as many of you engaged in this initiative as possible. If there's something that you heard one of our panelists say that, gosh, I'd like to learn more about volunteering at Operation Breakthrough, or reading to or providing books for preschoolers, or with St. Mark's Center, or in the school district, with an event for early childhood event that supports the family, or whatever that thing might be, Write that down. And if you have a real particular interest or an area of expertise, I'd like to know that too. If you're, if you've got a background in education, if you've got a background in healthcare, if you've, worked somehow in the food industries or something that would help us with food insecurity. Those are the kinds of things that we'd love to hear. So please fill this out before you go. And also, we didn't have a lot of time or we didn't have any time actually, to do audience questions tonight. And I know you have questions. If there are some burning questions that you have, write those down too. We will look at each and every one of those and try to respond as quickly as we possibly can. But over the next few weeks, I'm going to be taking these cards, a group of us, and we're going to sit down and we're going to follow up with each and every one of you. So give us a couple of weeks because there's a lot of you in the room. But we are so grateful for the interest that you're showing by being here tonight. You could be watching an NCAA basketball game, but I don't know if any of our teams are even still in it. But you chose to be here because you care, and we really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate the gift of the time that our panelists took to be with us tonight. So could you please give them a warm thank you? And is there anything else that you have burning in your hearts that you'd want to share with us before we close? You've got my phone number, you've got my email, so please, again, I mean that sincerely, that I'm looking at this as being an ongoing relationship, and it's going to take all of us, right? And many who aren't even in this room today, if we're going to really, with God's help to obviously get this across the finish line. So thank you so much. All right, I'm going to close this in prayer, but please fill out these cards, and thank you again for being here tonight. God, we give you thanks for this evening, and I thank you for each person in this room tonight, Lord, that you brought them here and that you're stirring in their hearts, God. And I pray that you would continue to stir in all of us, and really, Lord, we humbly ask you for your guidance, your wisdom, your strength, and your courage, Lord, as we seek to be used by you to really do our part, Lord, to help ensure that each child, our children, and they are our children, Lord, has a future with hope, that they're able, Lord, to live into their God-given potential, which is vast, and, Lord, as we were reminded tonight, they each have a contribution to make to this world. And it's our job, Lord, to clear the obstacles and the barriers from their pathway so that they can do everything that you've intended for them to do and be. Thank you for all of the organizations represented here on this platform and the organizations represented in the room tonight. Pray your continued strengthening and encouragement and blessing upon each of them. And we give all that we are and all that we have, Lord, to you. May you put us to work. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.